Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome back, friends, new friends, back to Dominant Mets Nation. And oh boy, in Mets land, do we have a lot of news. A lot of news. We all know the offseason has come upon us as the World Series concluded a couple short days ago. But, the news out there in Mets land is, pretty juicy. You've heard all of the reports. Who are the Mets going to pursue? Skubal. I mean, big names out there that the Mets could pursue. But now you hear the Braves go after two former Mets coaches. Is that a big deal to you? Well, you know what? I feel it's pretty interesting. So we're going to examine that. But, I feel Mets fans right now are pretty divided about a couple things. And at the end of the day, when you have a fan base that is divided, not that it's a bad thing, but at the end of the day, winning brings us all together. So I think back to our owner, Steve Cohen, and I think about what he must be thinking. I think back to past statements. And at the end of the day, my feeling is we are going to have a very aggressive offseason. And, one would say, okay, that's obvious. But since David Stearns has been here, I feel his off seasons have been much more conservative than I would have liked and maybe you would have liked. I feel like this offseason money shouldn't be an issue where it has maybe been an issue in the past. I mean, the Mets spent $800 million. So, I mean, let's be realistic last offseason. But, I mean, you know what? I feel that tax threshold of going over, let's say the 305 or whatever the Steve Cohen luxury tax is, I don't think we're going to worry about that so much this year. We all know next year there could be a new collective bargaining agreement or there could be no baseball. So, this has a very significant meaning this offseason. We're all wondering which direction is David Stearns going to go in. Obviously, we know we need to upgrade our starting pitching in the worst way. We need to upgrade our defense. We need to get younger. We need to get faster. We need to be dynamic. But also, we need to see what we have down in the farm. Because, I'm sure a lot of you have realized this, but our farm system has gotten much better in the last couple years. ESPN ranked the Mets as the #1 farm system in all of baseball. I mean, that was surprising. And MLB.com has the Mets ranked around 5, 6, 7. So, either way, the Mets have improved tremendously in the farm system. Regardless, what are the Mets going to do? Are they going to utilize some of those chips to improve quickly, get a Tariq Skubal, or could it be somebody else, maybe not of that pedigree, but somebody very, very talented? We will see. But I want to play something for you because I think it's very important for us to know what the mission is and what the goal is from the boss, from Steve Cohen, because he's going to be pulling the strings ultimately. So I'm going to play you shortly words from the owner, and this will lead us into today's video, today's topics. I also have some clips from MLB insiders. One of the big topics in the last couple of days was obviously Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz. They opted out. So is it going to be something that the Mets pursue both of these guys? Can they sign both of these guys? So we have a couple insiders weigh in on those on those very important issues. Okay. So let us get going here. And again, this is going to be a pretty, I feel, lengthy video. So again, like the video, subscribe if you're not yet subscribed. And, we're probably going to cut this video up too. But let's start off with Mr. Steve Cohen. And let me bring this up.
Incredible opportunity that is. And so, that's how I'm thinking about this. It's really about building something great, building something for the fans. I'm not in this to be mediocre. That's just not my thing. I want something great. And I know the fans want something great. And so that's my goal, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be an owner who builds a team that has continued success. We want to create a blueprint for winning. We will hire great baseball people like Sandy Alderson. Sandy and I share the same philosophy. We want to find great players and make them better.
That's
Okay. All right, folks. Sorry about that. Some technical difficulties. What fun would it be without some technical difficulties? But we are back right now. And okay, so I wanted to play those quick words by Steve Cohen, and he made those statements shortly after he bought the team that he's not in it to. It's not really about making money. It is not in it. He's not in it to make money. So this is going to be one of those offseason pivotal points in, I would say, a Steve Cohen tenure. Steve Cohen tenure, because right now, like I said, the first two off seasons with David Stearns at the helm have been pretty conservative. Build up the farm system, plug in a couple, mid-ling starting pitchers from Severino to Manaya. But we've never really gotten that big fish. Never gotten that big fish. Although we tried last year with the Garrett Crochet. Is this going to be the offseason that we actually get one of those pieces? A lot of the news out there, there's a lot of news out there saying that the Mets are definitely, insiders are predicting that the Mets will try to make big splashes in a big way. So I think that's very, very important. I really do think they are going to make a couple big splashes. We're gonna talk about that soon. But the first thing I really want to talk about is this Antoan Richardson going from the Mets to the Braves. Also, Jeremy Hefner was signed by the Braves. Both those two, Jeremy Hefner was fired. Antoan Richardson was given an opportunity to return to the Mets. And that was a big to-do last week. Everybody wondering, hey, why is Antoan Richardson not, accepting the Mets offer? And, everybody was on the spectrum of, okay, you know what? Maybe he wants to be promoted. Maybe he wants to be a bench coach, a manager, and the Mets are not giving him that opportunity. And he's going to go elsewhere to pursue that opportunity. But at the end of the day, with Antoan Richardson first, he's getting an opportunity to be a first base coach. So it's not like he's going to the Braves and they're promoting him. Unless I'm missing something, he's going to the Braves to be in the same position as he was. And I mean, to add insult to injury, it's not like he's going to another major league team. He's literally going to the number one Mets rival in the National League. So, I mean, it does kind of hurt in that respect. And the Braves have been a pretty smart organization. I mean, they won the World Series a couple short years ago, although last year was a rough year. I mean, they've been a pretty intelligent organization, making a lot of good moves. And, I'll be honest, when I first saw that signing, Jeremy Hefner and Antoan Richardson, I was a bit angry, a bit upset because it brought up, kind of hard feelings. At the end of the year, I didn't think all those guys were the reason. I didn't think Jeremy Hefner was the reason. Jeremy Hefner was here years and years before this year in which the pitching just stunk. And those years we had productive years from our pitchers. So I didn't think that this young pitching coach who has been hailed all over the world, I remember Yamamoto and his people, saying such good things about Jeremy Hefner and that he would love to be here. This is a couple years ago. So Jeremy Hefner is still a very young coach, still a huge career in front of him, But now, okay, he's going to go to the Atlanta Braves. All right, we'll see what happens. I would predict Hefner is going to be very, very good. Antoan Richardson showed last year how productive he could be at first base. But, again, everybody's wondering why Antoan Richardson left. And, I'm doing, I see a lot of different articles. But the thing that I saw is one of the articles, it says, why didn't Richardson return to the Mets? He revealed via Mike Puma of the New York Post that there was a difference in his value, specifically his salary. And then Richardson said, he goes, I had proposed salary with benefits included. The Mets had proposed a salary with benefits included. So we differed on salary part. So the benefits were included on both parts. Richardson wanted benefits. The Mets said, yeah, that's fine. But it kind of bothers me. I just said early on that I believe Steve Cohen's going to go all in. But then I read this article, that the Mets lost Antoan Richardson based on salary. So how do you sell that to New York Mets fans who just suffered a horrific 2025? Suffered horrific 2025. The Mets spent almost $500 million on payroll, and the one coach that they valued, that they felt superseded their expectations and did a great job, apparently, according to Antoan Richardson, his words, the Mets weren't willing to step up and pay. I mean, to me, that just makes me feel that maybe they didn't want the guy, and optics wise that they couldn't they couldn't straight up fire him. But, it just doesn't make sense, because if they valued him, a team that has endless amounts of money should have been able to step up and pay him. Maybe there's more here than meets the eye, more here than what Richardson is telling us. But, the guy's bitter. Goes to Atlanta Braves, doesn't get a promotion in title, goes to the same position, and goes to the rival too. You go to the Atlanta Braves, and that's going to hurt, Mets fans. That's going to hurt, but obviously Antoan Richardson's not going to care about that. You're going to want to show the Mets organization how talented you were, and you're going to want them to feel, and you're going to want them to kind of feel the pain. You're going to want to go win in Atlanta. But as a Mets fan and as, a Mets supporter, you just, boggles your mind. It boggles your mind. Did they really kind of value him or not? Because you can't tell me the Mets weren't able to meet the salary expectations of Antoan Richardson. And like I said, he didn't go to the Braves for an updated position title. He's not a bench coach. He's not a manager. He's not even a third base coach. Apparently, he's going to be a first base coach. And honestly, I don't really get that. I really don't get that. Oh, shoot. I'm looking at the chat right now. Again, I'm not really paying attention because it's 1 a.m. But again, Dan, I see you a couple great things you wrote. Richard, honestly, I was going to message you because I haven't been doing a lot of live streams. So I just wanted to check in on you, make sure you were doing good. You said no sound on the video. Okay, yeah, I apologize earlier on. Like I did realize that. I'm having a lot of issues, and that's why I haven't been doing a lot of live streams. But luckily I got that worked out in a couple minutes. Anybody watching replay, that's going to be edited out. But thank you for letting me know early on. Yeah, he went to the, honestly, I'm going to put this up. He went to the Braves as an FU to the Mets. I mean, like, really, if you're the Mets organization and your fans, how do you square this up? How do you square this up if you really, really valued this man? If you really, really value this man, everybody was saying last week he wanted to be promoted, right? And I said, okay, that makes all the sense in the world. The guy did a great job. He wants to leverage that great performance and get a promotion. It makes all the sense in the world. But he's not getting a promotion, folks. He's going to Atlanta to have the same exact job as he had with the New York Mets. And then, according to Mike Puma, the only reason he left the Mets was because of a disagreement in salary. So you cannot tell me that a team that has endless resources valued him. You just can't tell me that. But that's very, very disappointing. Okay. So, moving on, and again, some more notes. According to Mets insider Andy Martino, New York did try hard to bring Antoan Richardson back. However, there was no world in which they were going to be able to retain him. Richardson also addressed reports of him not wanting to be back with the Mets. Even when speaking to other teams, he kept the possibility open that he would return to New York to continue in the same role he has held. Okay, so this is a quote from Richardson. He goes, "The narrative of me not wanting to be a Met, that's kind of bogus. Once I was allowed to speak with other teams, I remained open to returning to Queens, while also focusing on finding an opportunity that was more in the line of what I was looking for." Okay, so I mean, just commenting, everybody's saying right now this is a huge loss for New York for several reasons. Richardson was lauded for his work with the base runners. Juan Soto, never considered the most fleet-footed player, obviously sold 38 bases, so he did a great job with guys like Juan Soto. But also in the middle of the year, they had some crazy streak, almost 40 stolen bases without being caught. So, Richardson did a couple great, phenomenal things that not many people have done. Juan Soto, again, if you look at his career stolen bases in other years, not very impressive. But this year, 38 stolen bases, almost a 40-40 man. And again, based on what I'm reading, there was a lot of innuendo out there. And I don't like how the Mets treated him. I'm going to be honest right now. This is not how you treat a commodity. Right? A guy like Antoan Richardson, who you could consider him a top first base coach in all of baseball. You have the most resources, the most money, and the one thing they can't agree on is salary. That is the one thing. And honestly, I got to say this. This decision wasn't made by Steve Cohen. This internal decision about personnel was not a Steve Cohen decision. This was clearly on David Stearns. Clearly, because he's in charge of baseball personnel. So going into the offseason, when my expectations are through the roof, when we have to make up for 2025 because that was a horrendous year, and this season, all bets are off. We don't know what's going to happen next season in 2027. We don't even know if there's going to be a damn season. And the first time that you have a chance to reward success, David Stearns doesn't do it. Now the thing is, I was upset with David Stearns at the end of the season. I was upset with Carlos Mendoza. I was upset with the whole Mets organization. In the last couple of weeks, I tried to be more positive. I tried to be a little more forward thinking, but this really brought back bad feelings. This is why I'm doing a live stream 1:00 in the morning, because it's bothering me. And, maybe I'm being a little too overly negative. But again, I just don't like not rewarding success. I don't like it. Maybe this is a guy who, could have been a third base coach. You could have promoted him, then could have been a bench coach. But again, I have a feeling that David Stearns, this was not a David Stearns guy. Again, I believe he was hired in 2023. So that was before the David Stearns tenure. And, David Stearns seems to be very infatuated with just David Stearns guys. meaning he elevates guys he hires. And okay, maybe you have a little extra attachment because you personally hired them, and it's an ego thing. Because I'll tell you what, who was more successful last year, Carlos Mendoza or Antoan Richardson? Right? So you give Carlos Mendoza the benefit of the doubt that he's going to grow, he's going to get better. But a guy who already, achieved a high level of success, even Jeremy Hefner, he got the boot. I know there were bad results this year, but Jeremy Hefner also has a track record of doing great things. Sean Manaea last year, who was the pitching coach when Sean Manaea had his best career year of his career, that was Jeremy Hefner. So Jeremy Hefner has had success. Phil Maton, who they took off really the scrap heap last year, and now Phil Maton has turned his career around. Who was the pitching coach that orchestrated that? Again, that was Jeremy Hefner. So Jeremy Hefner has had successes as well. But again, there needed to be somebody who took, the blame. I mean, so this is the coaching staff. The coaching staff, you give them the boot. And also, too, does that sit well with guys like Antoan Richardson? Antoan Richardson, not only did he not get his salary request, then he got to see all of his colleagues get the boot. So why do you want to be in an organization that, is so reactive? I mean, if you're Antoan Richardson, that could be you next year. So again, the Mets this year under David Stearns, I need to see. I'm excited, but like right now, it just seems like the Mets have a very long way to go. And again, I'm not going to hinge my positive or negative feelings on like this Antoan Richardson thing. It's just that like, I just wasn't so happy about how this transpired. And Richard, so you're right. Peter's holding a grudge, no doubt. There's a lot of negative storylines right now. A lot of, I was, I was, going through a lot of research, Googling this, and you see a lot of negative storylines. Pete, a lot of people think that Pete is not coming back. Pete is feeling, a lot of different ways not so good. But you're right. Treating employees, treating colleagues, every other colleagues see that. They see the way their colleagues, their coaches, their mentors are being treated. And that just takes me to the next thing. Everybody's wondering, how is Juan Soto, how does Juan Soto feel about this? Juan Soto was somebody who really benefited from Antoan Richardson being on this team. And, I saw it right away, as one of the negative stories that I saw, it says New York Mets risk angering Juan Soto after losing coach who's one of the best. And, he is one of the best first base coaches in the league. I'm not sure if the Mets saw any potential out of Richardson in terms of being a third base coach, in terms of being a bench coach, or any other position in the organization. Apparently not, because again, they couldn't even meet his salary demands as a first base coach. So I'm hoping Stearns gets a question on that in the future. Like Antoan Richardson said, he wanted to be a Met. He wanted to grow with the Mets, stay with the Mets. The only reason he is not a New York Met was because you couldn't meet his salary demands. Why didn't you value him enough to keep him? Coaches, their salaries aren't on the payroll. I mean, they're not on the player payroll, so it's not like that's going to hurt us in terms of luxury taxes. You could pay a coach $20 million a year, a third base coach, first base coach. I mean, that's a little insane, a little ridiculous. But what I'm saying is it's not affecting you in terms of luxury tax. So why wouldn't you meet his demands? So again, there had to be something more than meets the eye. Okay, so New York Mets top brass really could find themselves, maybe angering Juan Soto after not bringing back a coach who really Juan Soto described. And Juan Soto said this. His quote was, Antoan Richardson is one of the best I've ever seen. That quote comes right from the mouth of Juan Soto, your franchise player. our franchise player who we gave $800 million to, and we couldn't even secure the guy that took his game to the next level. No, we couldn't do that. So news is Richardson was hired today or yesterday, Wednesday. The Atlanta Braves made him their first base coach despite engaging in talks with the Mets. So, I mean, Richardson really transformed the he transformed the Mets in a big way. He really did. The New York Mets boasted the highest stolen base percentage in all of baseball. You saw success with Juan Soto. You saw success like in, really big stretches of the season. But did anybody know that everybody know this? The Mets had the highest stolen base percentage in all of baseball, 89.1%. So that was the highest. His influence on Soto was extremely impressive and noticeable. And his career high before 38 last year was 12. That was his career high. So, they also asked Juan Soto, what makes Richardson so great? What makes him so special? What makes him so different? And these are the words of Juan Soto. He says, well, he really studies and he reads movement and everything. He helps us out big times. I give him all the credit in the world for what he's doing because he teaches me a lot of things that I didn't have knowledge of. And I mean, how significant is that? And this is what I don't think enough happens on the major league level. I mean, this is why you have the minor leagues for more of a learning experience. But here's a guy in Richardson who taught a guy in Juan Soto who's been a major leaguer for a very significant period of time now. Over 5 years, 5-6 years, and he's taught Soto things that he didn't even know. I mean, that's what you want. You want guys who are teachers. I mean, you want guys like this. These are guys you want. But, again, we couldn't go the extra mile. And again, do we risk angering a guy like Juan Soto? I don't know if Juan Soto would be angry, but I'm pretty sure he would be disappointed because he realizes how much Richardson was an asset to the team. And again, I've read about like 10 articles because there's a lot of articles. Every single article I've read said Richardson was interested in returning to the New York Mets. And again, as I mentioned about 10 times already, salary demands was the only thing that they could not work out. All right, so again, let's get to the next topic. I'm gonna fix. I think I gotta fix something with the settings because I'm gonna play a video right now. Just give me 1 second. Honestly, I've literally bought a computer every single year in the last like 3 years. This last computer I bought, it's horrible, horrible, horrible. Okay, all right. So let's see if this works. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play some comments by some MLB insiders with regards to Diaz and Alonso returning to the Mets, and then we'll react.
Mets re-sign Diaz and Alonso, re-sign one, or they sign neither of the two?
That's a heavy question because I tell you what, Sal, I really do think all three of those possibilities are on the table. So I'm going to go with the middle option, which is sign one of the two. I think that is probably the most likely. I think Alonso is more likely than Diaz. I've been saying that for a while, only because I look at Edwin Diaz's market and I see basically every team in baseball wanting this guy, including probably most every big market team in baseball who will be willing to pay them. I look at David Stearns' history of not really wanting to pay relievers, go multiple years for relievers, really invest in relievers. And despite the fact that Edwin Diaz is the best one in the market by far, you put all that together and I say, I just don't know if the Mets are going to commit to this guy. Alonso's market, I think, is much narrower. So I'll give the Mets the benefit of the doubt, or I'll give this situation the benefit of the doubt and say most likely one of the two.
Look, I love that logic. I wish, as a guy that wants to see the third option have them both back, or no.
Okay, so the first answer right here we have DeComo basically saying that Pete is the more likelier guy because Diaz has a bigger market. Diaz has more suitors, and Alonso, the prediction is he's not going to have a lot of people in the market, so the Mets would have another opportunity. But here's the second point that I think a lot of Mets fans will not like. The second point where DeComo feels that Diaz doesn't feel likely is because he feels Stearns will not have the stomach to pay Diaz what the market will dictate. So that's going to be the crusher. That is going to be a crusher. We all know Diaz, one of the best relievers, best closers in all of baseball. 32 years old going to be next year. Closers, they have, the good closers we've seen have pretty decent shelf life. I mean, I in the last couple of years, I think it kind of hurts that Devin Williams fell off a cliff. Tanner Scott didn't have a great year after having a bunch of good years. So those guys, whatever. They're not Diaz. Edwin Diaz has consistently been very, very good, very, very serviceable since 2019. In fact, he has been legendary in certain years, 2022 and 2025, very good years. And also he, I think, has shown the ability. He has been resilient. He got hurt in 2024. In 2025, like I said, he kind of changed the dynamics of how he pitched a bit. He lost a couple miles per hour on his fastball, used to average a little over 99 miles per hour. Now his fastball is still very fast. It's in the 89th percentile. He averages 97.1 miles per hour on the fastball. And he throws it about 60% of the time. And then he has that slider. So, it's going to be pretty interesting how the Mets approach this because, like we're going to find out, this market is going to be insane with teams going after Diaz. And that's the one thing. Diaz, if we lost Diaz, that would hurt me a lot more than if we lost Pete Alonso. That's just me. Let's hear what Mr. Zeal has to say.
Option one, I guess that was.
Yeah.
I hate to think that they would depart with Edwin because I think in the big picture, because of the fact that you said he's the best guy in that role on the market, but he's also maybe the best guy in that role in the game. If you have a chance to retain him, how much more is it going to take to keep him in a place that he's comfortable, that he's had success, that he knows the system? So I think maybe they'll go the extra mile to sign Edwin Diaz. I think it may be harder to sign Pete because I think Pete wants length to his deal. And I don't think, to your point, with David and them thinking aging guy that's not a defender and all those other things, that they may not go with the length that Pete's going to require to stay here.
And if one team takes a bite at the apple with the length, then all of a sudden I think the Mets are out of the mix for Pete Alonso. And they have more of a built-in excuse this offseason to let him walk. You were coming off that magical playoff run a year ago. Now you're coming off a failure of a season. So if you let Pete Alonso walk, there's a little less. There's still sentimental value with the Mets fan base at all times with Pete Alonso. Maybe you could get away with it a little more easily. easily. With Edwin Diaz, they had already given him a 5-year, $102 million contract that he opted out of. I look at his market value on the open market right now, coming off another outstanding season. It's similar, maybe a little bit of a bump up. So if they did it once, I think the Mets will do it twice. So I land somewhere in the middle. I think Alonso doesn't come back, but I think Diaz is back.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know who that guy is, but he really talked a lot without really saying anything. He feels the Mets had more of an obligation to sign Pete last year because they went far in the playoffs. But this year, I'd be like, if you valued him, the Mets had a bad season. So I would say, hey, you would want to retain talent. If you value him as talent, that is more of a reason to get him. And also, to Pete, he's your home run king. He's your guy who has been a home run guy. And that's if you're making the Pete Alonso case to bring him back. Also, in terms of it being a little kind of tough, he says if somebody offers him that long-term contract, the Mets are going to bow out. And honestly, I do agree with that. If a long-term contract is offered to Pete Alonso, I really do not think David Stearns is going to bite the apple on that one. I really don't. If the Mets and Pete are going to make some type of deal and they're going to come together on some type of arrangement, it's going to be on something similar to what happened last year. Boris all of a sudden goes out saying we want a ridiculous contract. Teams pivot, and that leaves the Mets. All right, we'll do something. We'll give him a 2-3 year deal. He'll be DH half the time. He'll play some first base. We'll get him at a good value price. And that's why I think the Mets come back into the equation. But if some team out there just says, hey, Pete, 6-7 years, $200 million, I think the Mets right now are going to pivot in the fastest, quickest way. And that's that. Diaz, and I think he is much more of a commodity. And the thing is, markets react to how what players are worth. You're going to see. Last year, I said it right from the beginning. Pete wasn't going to have a great market, didn't have a great market. Everybody wanted to sign him who was in love with Pete, and I understand that. You're going to make an emotional decision based on, he's a homegrown Met. He hits a lot of home runs. We grew up with him. Yeah, there's going to be those attachments, but we got to look in the future. We got to look next year, 2 years, 3, 4, 5 years from now. 3 years, 4, 5 years from now, we're gonna have Soto, we're gonna have Lindor, we're gonna have Pete. Lindor is going to be 35, 36. Pete's going to be 34. Soto is going to be 30, almost 30 years old. So how does this project forward, and how does this make your team viable to be a winner in the future if you sign him and you allocate this much money towards those players? Not to mention you'd still have Nimmo under contract. So we gotta kind of think about this. If a guy like David Stearns is the president of the team, because David Stearns operates differently. If it was Billy Epler on the team, and not that I'm advocating for Billy Epler, but Billy Epler, he talked to Steve Cohen and say, all right, I think that we need a $400 million payroll. In 3 years, I think we need a $500 million payroll. And I think that Billy Epler would make a lot of mistakes, but I also think that he wouldn't be reluctant to sign a lot of these guys because that's his DNA. David Stearns, we know that he has a different DNA. We know it. We know he has a different DNA. So that's why I keep that in mind, that if we got a Pete Alonso, that would prohibit us from signing another guy who's younger, better, more defensive in defensive prowess. And I don't know. That's just my thinking on that. What's up? Dan the Man. Nimmo and McNeil are bad contracts. Well, you know what? McNeil, he's making $17 million this year. McNeil's making $17 million. He signed that 4-year, $50-something million contract a couple years ago. And I think that was around the time he won the batting title. At the time, I was like, okay, that's a decent contract. But, very shortly into that contract, it didn't look so good. It really didn't. And at this point right now, it's only 1 year left. So a team that wants a jack of all trades guy, and Steve Cohen wants to eat the contract, you can get rid of McNeil, but it's a negative value contract right now. It certainly is. Nimmo, when he signed the contract, 8 years, $160 million, $20 million a year, a year into that contract, you might have been able to trade him because he had value in that first year. In that second year, obviously he had multiple teams pursuing him. That's how we got the contract. very shortly after that, he started, he got hurt. He got hurt, and then he started showing his age. So now he's got a lot of wear and tear on his body. He's not a good defender. He's got no arm, another bad contract. So you could see how everybody wanted Nimmo. Everybody wants Pete. Sign him long term. And that's a good example, Dan, right there. That is a good example of how these contracts progress in the future and how they go from good, decent contracts to bad contracts. So now you have to have foresight when you're considering signing a guy like Pete Alonso to a long-term contract. So that's actually a very good example. The Nimmo McNeil, especially Nimmo, that's a good example. And that's why I did a video a couple of days ago. You can go check it out. If you didn't, it was about Bryce Harper. It was about Bryce Harper and the Phillies and the comment that the Dave Dombrowski made about he straight up said this. And I admire presidents who can talk about their players openly and honestly. And I respect that. And he basically challenged Bryce Harper. And I solely believe he said it to challenge Bryce Harper, not to offend him, but he did offend him. He said, I don't know if Bryce Harper can ever get to the elite player that he was when we signed him. That's what he said. And Bryce Harper is a little over 2 years older than Pete. And, he's got about, I think, 6-7 years left on the contract. So he's with the Phillies for a very long time still. But, if it wasn't working out, even though he's got a no trade, it might have been something that he can go to Scott Boras and say, hey, let's see if we can try to trade you. And if Bryce Harper knew that the Phillies didn't want him, all right, well, that's a different story. But the bottom line is the Phillies were worried that he's not going to be productive anymore, and he's 33. Pete's 31. So again, it's having that type of foresight, and it's a hard decision. It is a very hard decision to not sign a guy who last year hit 38 home runs, 126 RBIs, a guy who is your all-time home run leader, homegrown Met. But there's another side to this. There's more facets to the game. And one thing that, I value Pete for, and I don't think we value this enough. Pete's been really clutch down the stretch. And I'm never going to take away what he did last year in the playoffs. That whole playoff run doesn't happen if not for Pete. Against Devin Williams, he basically derailed the career of Devin Williams, but he also accelerated the progress of the New York Mets organization, taking us to 2 games short of the World Series, continuing his hot play against the Phillies last year. Pete really under pressure does very well. He always has a large amount of RBIs. His run producing is next level. Probably best run producer in Mets history. Best run producer in Mets history. Again, all-time leading home run. So those are things you cannot take away from Pete. But on the flip side, there's more sides. There's more in the equation of being a good baseball player. Is he good at running the bases? No, not the best. He's not good at running. That's a big problem. The guy defensively doesn't have a great arm. You got him at first base, but he can't toss the ball to the pitcher on those 10, 20-foot throws. So you would think the arm doesn't come into the equation when you're a first baseman, but we've seen how Pete got hurt so many times with the arm. So that's been there. And we know defensively, he was a -9 defensive run saves. Defensive outs above average, -9. He had 10 errors. Probably could have had a couple more if the scoring wasn't so kind. So again, Pete wasn't good. And I think in Pete's career, he's like a -6 or 7 DRS. Like that's his career, -6 or 7. If you look at a guy like Matt Olson has a positive 80-something in his career. So, a guy who is productive defensively versus a guy who is not productive defensively. And DRS is defensive runs saved. So, that is very important if you are, if you want to do what David Stearns is saying, run prevention, you need a guy who saves runs. MTP Billy Epler, really? Why? What's wrong with Billy Epler? He's not the greatest GM, not the greatest president. I said he'd run the payroll up to 500 million. I truly believe that, but it is what it is. It is what it is. I still firmly believe David Stearns is 100 times better. We see where the farm system is, but moves here or there. Okay, it doesn't matter if I'm happy or not. I mean, Antoan Richardson, all right, whatever. I think that could have been handled better. But at the end of the day, what is it about? It is about the Mets winning. It is about the Mets going in a better direction. This year, not a great direction, but there is something good. Everybody's saying that the Mets are going to continue to go down, but the Mets have done this in the last couple of years, especially under Stearns. When expectations are high, the Mets don't do good. 2022, win 101 games. 2023, bad. Next year, 2024, expectations were low, and we exceeded them. So again, we have low expectations according to some folks. My expectations are high, but some folks are saying the Mets are going to stink. Okay, fine. The Mets are good at exceeding expectations. So that could be another way of looking at it. But I solely believe that the Mets right now, we're going to be pleasantly surprised how we execute this offseason. That's how I'm thinking. But again, what's the competition? Biggest competition is going to be the LA Dodgers. They're coming off of 2 straight World Series wins, right? I mean, I admire the Dodgers because I respect them for winning, but in the worst way, I wanted to see the Blue Jays win. I wanted to see the Blue Jays win. It didn't happen, but again, that's our competition. Now the Dodgers, every single year, no matter how good they are, they win 100 games, get Ohtani, get Yamamoto. All right, they get better. Next year, Sasaki, make sure you get Teoscar Hernandez. They continue to improve. They continue to get better. Glass now, Blake Snell, doesn't matter. Let's get this team as elite, Tanner Scott, as elite as possible. And then you get the rumblings this year that, hey, you know what? We need Kyle Tucker. And, that is a move that I could definitely envision the Dodgers doing. So, again, that's your competition. But what the Blue Jays did in the World Series shows you, every single one out there, that it doesn't matter how good the Dodgers are, doesn't matter what the circumstances is. The Blue Jays could have won that. They took it to Game 7, extra innings, and they should have won. They should have won, but, shoulda, woulda, coulda. But it does give other teams inspiration that if you have a magical special team, that you could do special things. And that's why that team in 2024, when the Mets had that magic, they had that run, and they took it to 2 games short of the World Series. So it could be viable, but I think it also shows David Stearns and the New York Mets how important that clubhouse is, how important good leaders are in that clubhouse. That's another reason why I'm a little disappointed that you don't bring a guy like Antoan Richardson back, who the players obviously liked, obviously respected, and obviously responded to. Yeah, Richard, I see the what you're writing. Hopefully you're feeling better. That is not good. Like I said, I didn't hear from you in a while. I was a little concerned, but I'm glad you're okay. All right, so let's get to the next topic. Okay, I mean, this is just like one last comment about Alonso. So this is ESPN's Jorge Castillo. He offered his answer about the situation. And I don't see, here's the thing. There'll be a lot of people, sports commentators, MLB insiders. They'll have their takes on it. I don't think they're in the know. I mean, John Heyman, I would say he's pretty plugged into the Scott Boras, Pete Alonso situation. So I always try to follow Heyman when he updates something. I mean, even if it's throwing us off, I think he's plugged into Boras, so that's why I always respond to him. But Castillo goes, the consensus seems to be that the Mets will be more active after their disappointing season. I mean, that's obvious. That's what we're all saying. And then he goes, the Mets need a frontline starting pitcher. Scooble rumors erupted as soon as the Tigers were eliminated. Okay, yeah, that's obvious. Then there's the first case. There's the case of the first baseman, Pete Alonso, a free agent for the second straight offseason. Alonso wants a lucrative long-term deal coming off of a rebound campaign. The Mets probably aren't going to give him one, which would leave first base to fill. All right, nothing too big revealed there. All right. And it's so funny. So many writers and people are trying their damnedest to link the Yankees to Pete Alonso. I mean, even more than Edwin Diaz, everybody's trying to link the Yankees to Pete Alonso. And I always wonder how much influence Scott Boras has on some of these writers. Because again, if you're a guy like Scott Boras, the biggest thing you want is two big market teams in on it, especially if you're the, New York Mets, New York Yankees, rival there. You also hear a team like the Boston Red Sox. I think that's going to be, a big team. Boston is where his wife is from. Boston is a team with a good mix of young players. They also made a lot of big moves last year. Garrett Crochet, they made the Bregman move, although Bregman, could, the opt-out situation. So he might not be there. But, they got a pretty good team. Roman Anthony, Marcelo Meyer. I mean, they got a lot of good young kids on that team. I could definitely see them trying to plug up first base with a legit slugger. I mean, the damage they did years ago with Ortiz, Manny Ramirez, having a legit slugger in Fenway Park. I could definitely see the Fenway Park and the Red Sox being a place that Pete, considers heavily. But again, do they give him that long-term contract? Even you look at how teams react and how teams operate. Even with a guy like Bregman, they gave Bregman 3 years, $120 million with 2 opt-outs after each of, year 1, year 2. So that's how the Red Sox are operating, kind of similar to the Mets. And then, they gave a long-term contract, but they gave a long-term contract to a young pitcher like Garrett Crochet. Would they be willing to go long-term for a guy like Pete? I don't know. I don't think they're operating like that, just like the Mets aren't operating like that. Everybody's pointing to one big destination that Pete would go to. And, this team's always out there when you're looking for a bad contract to be dealt, and that is the Angels. The Angels, are they going to swoop in and offer him 7 years, $200 million plus? I mean, if that happens, God bless Pete, God bless the Angels. But, these moves have to make sense. They have to make sense. Dan, you just sense bad blood in a dugout this year. Maybe it's just me. The thing is, I kind of felt that something is kind of went on in the clubhouse when a team for 1 year straight goes from last June to this June, like you're mentioning, for 162 games, the Mets had the best record in baseball. the best record in baseball. Then all of a sudden, mid-June, I think Senga hurts his hamstring on that Friday night. Then after that, the Mets had struggled to win. They struggled to win. They went on multiple extended losing streaks and frankly looked like a different ball club. The chemistry looked off. I mean, the team dynamic didn't change much. Like, at that time, Senga went out. But last year, the whole year, Senga was out. So it's not like you can't win without Senga. But around that time, around June 12th, June 13th, you're right. The Mets the whole vibe of the team changed. So did something happen? I mean, we don't know. I would guess that something would have had to happen, but again, I don't need evidence. The evidence I see is how they play on the field. Stuff like that happens in the clubhouse doesn't really come out. I mean, it doesn't really come out. The clubhouse is usually a sacred place, but truth be told, the evidence that you see in front of your face kind of tells you that possibly something behind closed doors happened, and it happened in a big way. And then, Alonso, was there some type of division between the stars that usually people take sides? Alonso, Soto, who knows? And then the veteran presence, you hear Lindor, the Lindor camp. Lindor was the leader. Then Soto goes, no, Marte, he's the leader. So were some of the older guard like Alonso and Lindor, not against, but maybe didn't agree with Soto and Marte? I don't know. I'm creating all this stuff in my head. I'm making it up, but this speculation happens when you have a season with turmoil and below expectations. And when you have a guy like Antoan Richardson, who did a great job, doesn't return over a dispute in salary. Now, I also wonder, what was the salary request from Antoan Richardson? Like, did he demand, like, what? I don't even know. Let me see if I could find how much he makes. Like, what was this about? Like $100,000 or? How do you find the salary of the first base coach? I don't even know how to do that. Like, I could find Stearns' salary. I could find Mendoza's salary. But how do you find the salary of Antoan Richardson? Okay. Okay. I'm not sure if this is accurate, but I did find something. It says that one article mentioned that Antoan Richardson was earning around, I don't know. I don't know if this, I don't think this is right, but he goes, one article reported he was earning $400,000 with the Mets, though it appears to be speculation rather than official. There's no publicly verified figure for his salary in 2025. So I just did a couple big searches, and the only thing that came up was a speculated report that Richardson was earning close to $400,000. But to me, that doesn't really kind of seem right. But again, let's just, for instance, he was earning $400,000. And Richardson goes, I did a great job this year. Let's renegotiate. I want $600,000. Mets come back, say, hey, you know what? That's a little too high. $500,000. So you're telling me you lost Antoan Richardson for that type of measly money? I know to us it's a lot of money, a couple $100,000, but we basically lost Antoan Richardson for around that much, like a couple $100,000, maybe even less than $100,000. Watch it be. We lost Richardson for $50,000. I mean, the richest owner in baseball loses a commodity, number one first baseman, and the first base coach. And that was the thing that Steve Cohen said years ago. They go, what are you going to do to build the team? What moves are you going to make? And his big thing is, I want the best people in place at each position. I want the best general manager, the best president. I want the best, at each position. So if you want the best at each position, you have the best first base coach, but you're not willing to up your ante. I don't get it. There's got to be more than meets the eye. What's up, game? My guess, 120K. Yeah, I think 400K was a little too rich if you're paying your first base coach 400K. But yeah, so let's just say that would be even more ridiculous if he was making probably 120 something. And he goes, I want 200,000. And the Mets go, no, we're going to give you 150. So you're telling me we lost Richardson for pennies. And it also tells you if we weren't willing to meet his measly salary demand, how much the Mets didn't value Richardson. They didn't value him. Or Stearns is just so, I mean, I'm trying to think of the right word, but, he's so against paying a guy, and maybe he doesn't value first base coaches. Maybe he values it, this success as more of a system-wide success. I don't know. And also, too, wasn't Richardson the first base coach in 2024? Maybe maybe that's more along the lines like, hey, in 2024, the Mets did this. I don't know what the Mets stats were in 2024. I didn't compare them. But again, that even that's the case, Richardson got better, his skill, whatever he did, the team responded to. I don't know. It's just that the team obviously liked him and responded to him, and the Mets didn't retain him, and Richardson wanted to come back. It doesn't sit well with me. Yeah. I just think that it's not out there. I think there's speculation out there. I just don't think that the true figure is out there because I did a couple search engines as well. Oh, well, maybe it'll come out. Maybe he'll say it in the Braves press conference, although these guys never open up like that. And I'm just looking at all these comments by Richardson, like, him trying to be, political, trying to be nice. He's like, yeah, me and the Mets, we parted ways because we both had different thoughts on my value. Meaning the Mets wouldn't meet his salary request demand. All right, let's see this. Oh, actually, I had a trade saved. I think I saw it proposed yesterday about Skubal and what the Mets would give up. I'm not sure if any of us are Jet fans out there, but what a sad state of affairs with the Jets. Giving up on the season. I mean, obviously the Jets have one win. It's already halfway through the year. Trading away two of their top guys. At least they got a bunch of draft picks. But if you're a Mets fan, Jets fan, not doing too well right now. Not doing too well. Okay, so this trade that I have here, it was proposed by Steve Phillips. He goes, he's going to get dealt from Detroit to New York. I have him going to the New York Mets. And he says, this is his trade. Tell me, guys, tell me if you would do this. So he said, obviously, the Mets would get Tariq Skubal. The Mets would give up Brandon Sproat, Jonah Tong, Luis Angel Acuna, and Brett Beatty. So in that trade, you don't have the only guy from the MLB roster really is you have Beatty and Acuna, but Acuna didn't really have too much value as an MLB commodity. So Brett Beatty is your MLB ready player. Then you're giving up Sproat and you're giving up Tong. So you're giving up multiple top end pitchers. But in this trade, you're not trading away a Carson Bench. You're not trading away a Jet Williams. So I mean that's pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting. And then the other day, Joe DeMayo, him, I think he does a really good job. What he does, he says that Brandon Sproat is going to be a number 4, number 3, or number 4. So, I mean, if those are your projections, and, the reason why he said that is Brandon Sproat does a couple things pretty well, has a decent fastball, changeup, slider. His pitchers are good to okay, but he doesn't have any elite pitches. Like Nolan McLean has a couple elite pitches. Jonah Tong has that elite fastball, and he has that Vulcan changeup. So he's got 2 elite pitches. So he values Jonah Tong as a better player. But so again, you would be giving up Sproat, who is projected as a number 4, Luis Angel Acuna, who is basically a pinch runner, defensive placement. So the value in the trade would be Brett Beatty, and it would be obviously Jonah Tong. And Brett Beatty, a thing on him is, how do you feel about Brett Beatty? In the last 2 months, Brett Beatty kind of broke out. Brett Beatty kind of showed why the Mets were sticking with him. So you would be trading Brett Beatty off of, as him having a high value. So at least you trade him off of, a high value. The Mets often trade guys when their value is low, like Drew Gilbert, Blade Tidwell, guys like that. We weren't traded off of their, playing well. So, I mean, you want to trade guys when they're playing well and get better value for them. But then again, I was very impressed with Brett Beatty. Brett Beatty gives you that positional versatility, second base, third base, and the swing that I saw in late August and how it developed. I mean, this swing, it just seemed like his swing he changed his swing. The exit velocity, the balls were bouncing off his bat. The exit velocity increased. He really figured something out. So, I got to say, they did a pretty good job with Brett Beatty. I saw a lot of life there. And again, you have the positional versatility, but again, you're going to get a Tariq Skubal. So if you give up Beatty and Tong, and those are the 2 best pieces in the package, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would really consider that. Okay, yeah, game. So you write a good analysis. I'm a big Beatty fan because I saw what his problem hitting was, which was Chavez's hitting philosophy. So now with hopefully a decent hitting coach, he can be a star. He's got a sweet swing and power. Yeah, I really do think he has a sweet swing. I think the guy has, he has the ability and power to go opposite field as well. I really do like Beatty. I really do. And then, you saw what he can do around the infield too. Not just a third baseman. You could put him at second base. That also increases his value. But I do think that we really haven't, seen the best of Beatty by far. I would love to keep him. I mean, last year with the Mets, before I get to what I was going to say, like Brett Beatty in 393 ABs, only 393 at bats, he had a 3.1 WAR. I didn't realize that he had a 3.1 WAR. That's for the amount of games he played and the amount of at bats he had. That's really good. Really good. 18 home runs, 50 RBIs. 254 batting average, 313 on base. See, that's one of the things that I always thought he could be much better in. When you see his minor league numbers, his on base is always close to 400. 435 slug, 748 OPS. But I'm going to look into something even further. Yeah, like I was saying, in August, I noticed a change. We all noticed a change in his swing. In August, Brett Beatty, 23 games. In 23 games, 75 at bats, batted 338. And he had a 410 on base, 527 slug, and a 937 OPS. This is the version of Brett Beatty that I envisioned when I saw him as a minor leaguer. Obviously, 338 average, going to be tough to do, but this type of hitter, and we saw it in August. He had a full month of really being dominant, 4 home runs, 7 RBIs, nothing crazy with the run production, but he had 25 hits, and, he was just very patient at the plate. That was the version of Brett Beatty that, again, in September, it was a little bit like more down to earth, but he still batted 271. So the last 2 months of the year, did we possibly see Brett Beatty turn the page? Because I think that there's really a good chance. He's a young hitter, and these are numbers similar to what he put up in the minor leagues. That's the one thing about like trading for a guy like Tariq Skubal. No matter what package you give up, you're going to have to include some talent that's going to hurt. Some talent that's going to hurt. I love if we can build a package around Sproat. I love if we can, put middling prospects in there. But again, for them to do it, it's probably going to have to hurt. But again, if you're a Mets fan, is it worth it? Like, all right, if it's going to hurt, let's not do it. Let's maybe wait till next year. He becomes a free agent. And if we sign him, great. And if not, we pivot elsewhere. Richard, when you cut the ball travels further. Yeah, I remember this guy I used to play softball with. Monster, beast, would literally hit these 400-foot, like playing softball, 400-foot, cutting the ball. Literally, it's nasty. But yeah, I couldn't notice Beatty was doing that, but if you pick that up, that's great. All right, folks. Well, I'm gonna get going. I'm gonna start going to bed. I'm getting a little tired. But thank you all for staying in here. I'm sorry the beginning of the video was messed up, but what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Yeah, I really got to fix my computer. I literally have 3 computers in this room. So I got to do something. I got to get one of these working right. And they're all new. They're all within like, a year and a half. But I apologize about that. I will work on that. But again, if you can, like the video, subscribe. I appreciate you all. Yankee fans, Mets fans. I had a couple Yankees fans message me about like Alonso, but who the hell knows what's going to happen? It would really hurt if Diaz went to the Yankees. I'll tell you that. I really would tell you that. But, oh, well, who knows? Have a good night. Enjoy your night. Richard, feel better. Dan, thank you for being here. Game, thank you for all the great comments. Yeah, really great stuff. I can't wait till something starts happening, but I assume the stuff's going to start happening in the next couple of weeks. Have a great night.